What's up, everybody? Welcome to Limited Level Ups. Today, we're going to be talking about how to draft decks and not just a pile of good cards in Final Fantasy. I think this is a really important step into becoming the best drafter you possibly can be. You know, moving away from understanding just what the good cards are in a format into figuring out how to piece them together into something a little more cohesive, knowing, the balance of different card types you might want in your deck. This is something that, of course, applies to every format, but I think it's something that I've just been, it's just been on my mind a little bit more in Final Fantasy. I think it's a good format to do a deep dive on this kind of topic, because in Final Fantasy, I kind of think of it like the card pool is a bit larger. The viable card pool is a bit larger. There's not really a lot of junk. Most cards are cards you would consider putting in your deck. And with a larger card pool can come some challenges sometimes, and also some opportunities. Like I had somebody in my Twitch chat this week ask, I'm having a real tough time in this format, and I've had pretty good success lately in other formats. Why do you think that might be the case? And I kind of said, well, it's not as easy as saying, okay, these are the 3 good decks, you should draft these. These are the good cards, you should draft these cards. Some formats are a little more like that. And I think it's a little bit trickier to get together a cohesive deck if you maybe don't know the ins and outs. And I posted the video, the VOD for that on the YouTube channel. And somebody posted a comment in response to that comment, and were like, that's an interesting way to put it, because I've actually found the opposite. I found that with a larger card pool, the format's actually easier for me because I have more room to explore. I can, I'm not just shoehorned into, you have to do this thing. And I think both things are true, right? It cuts both ways. There's more room to mess up because there's more options. And if you know what you're doing in deck building, well, you can really come out ahead. I think knowing exactly what cards you want in your deck and how to piece them together is a really important factor when you're just considering what makes a fine, good limited player and a really strong limited player. So I'm going to do my best today to share some of these ideas. So I think the first thing to cover when you're trying to build better decks is you want to have a good idea of what your potential end goals are, right? Like, what is the possibility space you're working within the format? What are the archetypes that are supported? How does each card in the format fit into those? And most of what we're going to cover today is we're going to visit each archetype in the set and talk about the cards you might want and why you want them and the balance of those type of cards in each deck. And when I say archetypes, I'm not exactly saying like what does each 2 color pair do. Like, I'm not talking like the wizard's guidelines of like, blue red is this and black blue is this. I'm talking mechanically, the real nitty gritty of how the cards interact with each other. And of course, there's like a good deal of overlap between the stated themes for the color pairs and like the actual archetype spaces we're going to talk about. But I think kind of an important, non-obvious thing to talk about is that as you get better as a limited player, as a deck builder, you generally want to think less about colors, less about rigid color pairs and archetypes, and more about what does each card or what does a certain card add to a given archetype. For example, one of the spaces, one of the archetypes in this set I see is the graveyard. And that's billed as, a black-green thing. But I also see a lot of overlap with some red cards in the set and some of the blue cards in the set. There's a lot of good red and blue flashback cards, right? And so if you can see what I've got in front of me, I've got some of those archetypes laid out that we're going to talk about. And I've got the graveyard deck labeled as BG UR graveyard, like big BG and small UR, which is to say that I think when you're in this kind of graveyard space where you're milling, you want to consider cards that are basically every color about white. And I mean, once in a while, maybe even the white cards, but mostly the non-white cards. And why that matters is that if you start in this graveyard space in the draft, like say you first pick a really good rare that says, okay, I want to mill, or I want to reanimate this card, an Arden or something, your possibility space of the cards you're looking at going forward shouldn't just narrow into, okay, I just want green and black cards. You're also looking for good flashback cards in red, for good flashback cards in blue. And if you narrow yourself into just thinking, okay, I'm green-black, that's about the graveyard, you miss a lot of opportunities in the draft. Along the same lines, knowing what your end goals are and what your possibility space is and where each card fits into those decks, into those archetypes, is going to make your drafting process a lot easier. It's going to make your decisions a lot clearer. So I'll give you an example here. Let's just say you start the draft with a corner by black mages, right? The 3 mana, they sack a thing, you make a mage token. Okay, well, that's going to lead you down a very different path than if you start the draft with a Shinra reinforcements, the 3 mana black 2/3 that mills 3 and gains 3. I mean, you're not going to first pick these 2 cards very often, but just for an example here. Because when I start with cornered by black mages and I go to my next pick of the draft, I'm going to want fairly different cards Then if I first picked a Shinra Reinforcements, because I first picked Corner by Black Mages, I think, okay, I want to be, lots of spells. I want to keep the game small. I want to be maybe, into the sacrificey space or maybe into the spell space. But if I take Shinra Reinforcements, it's completely different, right? I want to be milling, right? This is just a mill card through and through. I want to be filling my graveyard. I'm going to be looking for very different cards. And this knowledge is really important because putting the wrong cards in the wrong deck can often turn a pretty good card into a pretty bad card, right? So I think that Cornered by Black Mages, while a really strong card in general, not a black-green card at all. I don't think this is very good in your black-green, go-over-the-top, self-mill kind of decks. Just not the same kind of game plan, really. And so you can see a card that people talk about pretty highly, people take pretty highly, and go, yeah, it's a pretty good card. And if you put it in the wrong deck, it's just not going to perform very well. And you're going to be like, oh, I have all these good cards. Why aren't I winning? Like, why isn't this deck good? It's because it probably just doesn't fit what the deck wants to do. So yeah, just a knowledge of where the cards go and your archetypes, your final archetypes, the final angle, the vision. I think that's really important to have a concept of. Another reason I think it's really helpful to have a clear idea of what each archetype wants and kind of the vision, the end goal, is it helps you make better anticipatory picks, which is to say it helps you make picks that maybe don't look like they mesh that well with the cards you currently have, but could be good in the future. So here's an example. You're in pack 1. You first picked a good black rare. So like, Jecht or something. The 4-mana, 4/3 menace when it hits you turns into an awesome saga. So good card, but doesn't really lead you any synergy direction, right? And you go through pack 1, mostly taking some pretty good black cards, Sephiroth's Intervention, maybe you picked up a, Resentful Revelation, and as you get to the middle of the pack, you're like, okay, there's a Shinra Reinforcements, you take that, you have another Shinra Reinforcements the next pack, and you're like, okay, I've got a pile of black cards here, and 3 of them mill me. Okay, so you get to the wheel, you get to the later part of pack 1, and you see a Dark Knight Sword, which is the 3-mana job select equipment. The equipped creature gets +3/+0, and the equip cost is pay 3 life. And you see a red-green dual land. And so it might be very easy to just take that black sword there and go, okay, well, I've got a bunch of black cards. I might as well take another black card. Maybe it's not the best black card in the world, but, it could be fine in my deck. And you look at the green-red land, and, good drafters kind of know it's good to speculate on lands when you can, but it's a green-red land, and you're very base black. Like, you just don't see yourself using that card. Well, if you remember what I said a few minutes ago about how I see the black-green graveyard space as sometimes touching blue and sometimes touching red, well, if you have that knowledge, then you go, well, I've got all these mill cards, so that probably pushes me down a direction where I want to pick up the black-green leaning cards that are good in the graveyard. And I could also branch in the future into some of the red cards, too. I pick up Sorceress's Schemes. That's the flashback card that buys back a spell from the grave. So where to most people, that red-green land looks like it does absolutely nothing for you, I see if I'm in that graveyard space, I actually want to speculate on a red-green land. That actually looks pretty good for me in that spot, especially over kind of a middling playable like the sword. As a side note here, just a note on draft navigation when you're considering deck building and, interlacing synergies into your deck. One of the things that you should think about in general when you're drafting is my lane open, right? And we tend to shortcut that to, are my colors open, right? Because, a lot of the time they can mean fairly similar things. But if you're taking that next step and really getting the nitty gritty of things, I think it does mean something a little bit different. It more means, am I seeing the cards for my archetype, not necessarily for my color? Because you could be next to a black drafter drafting completely different cards than you might want, right? And so I think as you're drafting, it's really good to clock that kind of stuff. Just say, did the mill cards wheel in pack 1? If not, then you might be fighting against the grain a little bit. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pivot. It just means that you have to say, well, if I see a town greeter, something that mills me, and I really want that mill, I should take that pretty darn highly. Like, I'm going to take that maybe over a slightly better generically good card, because to make my deck tick, I really, really need this card. So that's just something to clock too. Just think like, well, am I going to see my synergy pieces later in the draft? The inverse is true as well, where it's like, wow, my lane is super duper open. I actually get really hooked up in this draft because I can take the generically good cards, the removal spells that people are going to want to take early, and I can wheel maybe the mill cards, the flashback cards, whatever space you're in. That's just, another layer on top of things when you're thinking about draft navigation, considering all the synergy stuff. Now, one thing that's important to bring up when talking about synergy and deck building is don't overdo it, right? It's very easy to get lost in the synergy sauce. It's very easy to convince yourself to take a worse card over a much better card in the name of synergy. It's about finding a balance. And some formats are more about synergy than power. Some formats are more about power than synergy. I think Final Fantasy strikes a really nice balance, actually, where there's a lot of picks where I go, yeah, this card is better. If you look on 17 lands, the game hand win rate is better for this card than this other card, but I should take the more synergistic card because my deck is really, really doing the thing, right? I just really want, to take that self-mill example, I just really want every town greeter and Shinra reinforcements I can possibly get because I've got so much flashback and so many ways to use the graveyard. I generally recommend just taking the strongest card in the pack for most picks, and usually synergy is a tiebreaker, or when it's very, very close and you go, you know what, my deck is very, very self-mill heavy, and I will take, for example, Resentful Revelation, which is the 2 black mana, look at the top 3, put 1 to the grave, over Sephiroth's Intervention, which is the really good black removal spell. And I'm not going to do this very often, right? But I'm going to do this when I say, I've already got some pretty good removal, and my deck really, really wants to be milling, and, Resentful Revelation is one of the premier ways to do that, one of the premier ways to put cards in the graveyard. So, yeah, I think the situation is right here. Basically, I will make the synergy concession. The other big thing, aside from just knowing where each card goes in the format, is knowing the number of things you need in each deck and the balance and what number of things will make your cards tick. So how many artifacts do you need to make your Galacats turn on to become 3/3 flyers? How many spells do you need to want Black Mage's Rod as a good 2-drop in your deck? These are very tricky questions, right? Not necessarily intuitive, something that comes in time, something that comes with just, playing a new set and just figuring that out on your own. So as we get into these archetypes, these spaces, and we're going to get into that very shortly here, that's what I'm going to try to cover. I'm going to try to cover not only what are the cards you're looking for and what are the connections between the cards, but I'm going to try to give you somewhat of a good sense of what's the balance of each of these things, right? In your controlling decks, how much removal, how much card draw do you want? In your artifact decks, what's the count you're looking for? I can't give you perfect numbers, of course, because every deck is a little bit different. The needs and the wants of those decks are going to be a little bit different, but hopefully just setting up some baselines for folks that don't have those baselines or are a little bit shaky on them. Okay, so first archetype that we're going to cover is a fairly simple one. It's one that I talked a little bit about last week, but the white artifact space, where you really, are a white artifact aggro deck, basically. And again, just the idea of transcending colors, these archetypes transcending colors. This can be white-red, this can be white-blue, this can even be white-black in some spots. White-green doesn't happen really very often. I think it could happen, but mostly it's the non-green color pairs. So when you're in these decks, the high priorities are, of course, Magitech Infantry and White Auracite. White Auracite's the white removal spell. Infantry is the 1/1 that can search out other copies of itself. This one's an interesting one as far as counts go and where you want to take it in the draft. I've got some questions about this week. And I've kind of been okay with 2. If you have 2, pretty happy. If you've got 3 or 4, that's great. If you have 5, I think the more the merrier, honestly. When I first saw this card, we've had this type of card before, and often on these cards, you kind of think, well, you don't really want too many in your deck because you start to draw too many in your opening hand. But I actually think it's not bad at all if you draw a lot in your opening hand. Let's just say you had 7. I don't think you mind drawing multiple, right? You draw 3 in your opening hand, you go, great. Infantry on 1, 2 infantries on 2, go search in another. That's a really, really good start. I do think that this is the sky's the limit for your Magitech infantries. And I take them pretty highly. I value them pretty highly because I think when you get 2 in your deck or 3 in your deck's going to be pretty strong. I'll even play 1 sometimes if I have enough other artifacts and then have Galacats, have reasons to want more artifacts in my deck. That's kind of rare, but, if you need the playable, I haven't been too shy about that. And it brings us to Galacat, which I think is kind of the reason you want to put artifacts in your deck. There's not actually too many cards in this set that say, oh, you really want artifacts that are strong in this kind of space. Galacat is the reason. I mean, there's a rare or 2, of course, but when we're talking about commons and uncommons, Galacat is where you're looking for. I've been happy with both of the common white equipment, so that's White Mage's Staff and Paladin's Arms. If you can get the uncommon Dragoon's Lance, this card's absurd. This is one of the best cards for the deck. You obviously want that. I've also been playing a decent amount of Monk's Fist, though. This is the 2 mana, make a 1/1, the equipped creature gets +1/+0. And I think this is just a fine stand-in. Again, if you're trying to enable your Galacats, you do need to have, quite a few artifacts, playable artifacts in your deck. And we should probably touch on Galacat counts, right? How many do you need? Last week, I kind of just threw out a big number. I said something like 10 or 11. I think it's a little bit less than 10 or 11. I think you're happy with 7 or 8. The way the math works, or the way I think about the math for Galacat, is, you need to see two of the thing, right? Two artifacts to turn it on. So it's almost like you're playing a double pipped card, right? You're using your mana base math, and you're saying, okay, well, to play a double pipped card, a 2 black card, for example, you need like 8 or 9 black sources in your deck to be able to cast that card. And Gallicat is kind of the same. I think if you have 8, that's a reasonable number. This is a little bit shakier than mana-based math because sometimes your artifacts, they die, right? They're creatures and they go away. So, it's nice to be able to pad it out if you can. But yeah, I think 7 or 8 is really your bare minimum. And yeah, Gallicat is the real deal. Of course, I think most people know this. This is a card you very much want to enable. And moving into other cards here that I actually think are a little bit underrated, Magitech Armor. This is the 4-mana 4/4 vehicle, comes in with a 1/1 token. This card's great. I see this card quite late. There's also Lionheart, which I'm a huge fan of, and we're going to talk about this in another archetype or two. This is the 4-mana equipment equipped for 2. The equipped creature gets +2/+1, and when this enters, it deals 2 damage to any target. So, yeah, this is just like a lot of damage out of nowhere sometimes with your Gallicats or your Lances, right? Like 2 to the face, equipped Gallicat. I had a draft video I posted earlier this week where, I had a lot of lethals out of spots that I didn't think I was going to have lethal on the turn. And I drew for my turn, I drew a Lionheart. I'm like, oh, yep, that's just easy lethal. They're at 11. I just killed them. So yeah, do not overlook Lionheart or Magitech Infantry. Like I said, I get the sense that these two are a little bit underrated. Past that, another card that really belongs in this space and I think is kind of like a reward for having a lot of the job select equipment is Slash of Light. This is the 2-mana instant. It deals damage equal to the number of creatures and equipment you control to target creature. You don't really want this card in, any deck that doesn't have, I'd say, 4 or 5 job select equipment. Or I guess Magitech Infantry counts too, right? It makes 2 things. Because if you're just playing creature, it doesn't really scale the way you want it to, especially since creatures just trade off. You really, really do need to have these job select equipment that make multiple permanents to make Slash of Light good. And if it is good, it's really strong. Like I've had some spots where I have the tough pick between my 3rd or 4th Magitech Infantry and a White Auracite, right? And I think White Auracite is a little bit better, but, as I said, the sky's the limit with the infantries. I really want to get more infantries into my deck, and there's a Slash of Light in the pack as well. So it's like Slash of Light, White Auracite, and the infantry. And I have taken the infantry because I know I'm most likely to wield a Slash of Light, and that's almost as good, right? Not exactly as good, but it's good enough that I can make that pick. We've also got a few uncommons here that are good in this space. So Delivery Moogle, the 4-mana 3/2 flyer that searches for a 2-mana value artifact and puts into your hand. Yeah, I think you're aiming for 2 with this, and that, ideally you just have that. It's not something that you often have to go out of your way to pick up. Like, you often have 2 artifacts to go get. If you don't, I think your deck has other problems generally. So yeah, Moogle's just good. If your priorities are in order, it's going to turn on. Adalbert Steiner, another card I really like. One I've really taken a liking to and I've taken a lot higher as the days have gone on, because when I'm in this artifact space, I do take the job select equipment very, very highly. So Steiner is the 2-mana 2/1 lifelink. Gets +1/+1 for each equipment you control. I think to be happy with this card, you want 3 or 4 generally, but the more the merrier, of course. Then we get to kind of a weird one, Ash, Prince of Dalmasca. This is the 3-mana 3/2. The one it attacks, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a artifact in your hand and put the rest on the bottom. This is a card you get very, very late. You never really have to take it early. And I think to make it good, your artifact count has to be very high. It has to be something in the 11 or 12 range, right? Because if you ever miss on this, it's a disaster. Because the card on its own is not particularly good, right? It's like a 3-mana 3/2, so it doesn't block that well the turn it comes down. Needs to attack to do its thing. So you better hit. You better hit on this card the first time you attack. If you don't, yeah, it's kind of a disaster. It might just lose you the game on the spot. So yeah, talking about other colors here. So your red obviously adds the Samurai's Katana. This card is fantastic. It also adds Warrior Sword. I'm very happy to play both of these cards for my red-white decks. I've also been in the artifact space and moved into black quite a bit, actually. So, when you maybe first pick a Sephiroth's Intervention and another black removal spell, and then you realize, oh, the white stuff's really open, there are some black cards that actually synergize with what you're doing. So Black Mage's Rod, the 2-mana job select artifact that comes with, basically turns something to a pinging wizard. This card is also pretty good in these decks if you have a very high job select count. I've had black-white decks where I have 3 real creatures, right? It's just like, most of my things are just job select equipment. Once you get to that point, you're almost getting to the territory of being like the 1/3 red reach creature in Tarkir that pinged whenever a creature you control entered. Obviously, different set, and there's tokens, the mobilized tokens and everything. But I really like this card as just a good 2-drop in my black-white artifact decks. And also just, just a +1, equipping it to a Gallicat once in a while, like that gets the job done. The aforementioned Dark Knight's Greatsword, the 3-mana black job select that gives the creature +3/+0, and you can equip by paying 3 life. So this is another card that just does a lot of damage out of nowhere sometimes. You have a flyer or 2, you play this, you have, 3 extra damage on your Gallicat, you increase your clock by like a whole turn sometimes. So yeah, if there is a spot where this card is good, it is in this deck. And Ninja Blades, too. This is the rare that when you hit your opponent, you get to draw a card, discard a card, and deal damage equal to the discarded card. So yeah, very quality card in these white artifact decks. And then we get to blue. And blue is kind of interesting because blue is the obvious pairing with white. Like, it's billed as the blue-white artifact deck. But when I am blue-white, I find it's actually often not even for the blue artifacts very often. So when I'm blue-white, it's often because I have taken some Dragoon's Wyverns early, or even Sahagin. Sahagins actually pretty good in blue-white too. Think back to a lot of the cards we just mentioned, right? The White Orosite, this triggers it. The Lionheart, that triggers it. The Magic Tech Armor, the vehicle, that triggers it too. You also will play some Ice Magics, Dreams of Laguna sometimes. I'm not afraid, by the way, to play Dreams of Laguna in my blue-white decks that are a little bit more aggressive. I think it's still a fine card, even though it's not extremely like, balls to the wall, killing the opponent or anything like that. So that's totally fine. I do find Sahagin is a fine card in these artifact decks sometimes. But yeah, aside from that, the actual artifacts. So we've got Valkyrie Aerial Unit. This is the 5 blue 5/4 that has affinity for artifacts and has flying and surveils when it enters. It's a good card. It's a very strong card. I find that, I don't end up with enough artifacts to justify it, because you do need a lot for this one, too. I think you want to have something in the range of 10 or 11 as well. Maybe a little bit less than that, and it's a playable, but to make it really good, to make it like a 4-mana card, you want to have a pretty high artifact count. Or I'm so heavy white that the blue is a cost to my mana base, where I don't really want to be playing 8 islands in my deck. I want to have more of like a 10/7. If you have blue dual lands, like a blue-white dual land, it makes the card a little more appealing. But I just found it just doesn't make my deck all that often. Like I said, strong card, but there's some competing factors at play here. There's also Scorpion Sentinel. This is the 1/4 artifact that gets bigger when you have 7 lands. You don't really want to get to 7 lands all that often in these artifact aggro decks, so I'll play it if I really need the artifact. And I'm more likely to play this if my deck looks more like a blue-white flyer deck. So I have some of the artifact stuff going on. I have Gallicats, but I also have Dragoon's Wyverns, and maybe the Pixies, right? The 1/2 Pixie that attacks surveils one. Like, if my deck is a little more of that, a little bit less focused on artifacts, I like this as just a way to hold down the ground. That's where I kind of like that card. Retrieve the Esper is another artifact that makes 2 artifacts. You make one when it flashes back. Not super enticed by this one. For your 4-mana cards in your aggro decks, you really want those to hit hard, and this one just doesn't all that hard. So I would kind of lean away from this one in your best artifact aggro decks. And then we've got the gold cards, which are really interesting because a lot of them are not very good, and I'd actually suggest not playing them. So the rare Hope Esthium. This is the 2-mana 2/2 lifelink that says at the beginning of your end step, each opponent mills X cards, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn. I kind of thought of this card as like, okay, it's a hard to cast 2/2 lifelink, but 2/2 lifelink is good. The more and more I've played this card, the more I'm just like, oh man, I really don't want to mill my opponent here. And I have for sure lost at least one game where the mill actively hurt me, where my opponent, milled the Dreams of Laguna and found a removal spell off of it, and that was the difference maker in the game. So I actually try not to play this card, honestly, and it sounds, a little bit wild, because it's, 2-mana, 2/2 lifelink, that's pretty good. But I think that in enough matchups, that milling the opponent is enough of a downside. I also am not a very good fan of, this name is gonna get me. Titus, I don't know. I was told it was Titus, and then I was told that's not the right way to say it. People just say Titus in the Final Fantasy community. I'm just going to say Blitzball Star. Let's just say that. So Blitzball Star, this is the 1 blue-white 2/1. Then whenever it attacks, you can tap something your opponent controls. And whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Have not been very impressed with this card. And I was curious. I just checked out the stats for this card on 17 lands. Has way worse stats than I thought it would even have. And I don't like the card. It has almost a sub 50% win rate. And that's really, really, really bad. So yeah, I've just found that this card starts a little too small. It's not like there's a bunch of trinkety artifacts in the set where you can play it and then the turn after you like unload your hand of artifacts and it becomes massive. Usually, like, you play this, you play one artifact, it's now a 3-mana 3/2 that maybe gets an attack. Maybe your opponent just has like 2/2/2s and they go, okay, now I block. So I don't want to say this card is absolutely unplayable, but I wouldn't take this card highly at all. And if you do include it, it's going to be one of the lesser good cards in your deck. I do like Sid, Timeless Artificer. This is the 4-mana 4/4 that pumps your artifacts and your heroes. Yeah, this card's good. You know, nothing wrong with this card. Just easy. I'll play this card pretty happily. Not a super high pick. I don't generally go into blue-white because of it. I'll kind of treat this more as a reward for it's like, oh, I got a late Sid. Cool. But yeah, no, perfectly solid card. And then Noctis. This is the Esper rare. It's like a 4/3 lifelink that you can pay 3 life to cast artifacts out of your grave. Another one I'm not super into. Like, I could see some sort of slower artifact deck in this format, but I don't think that really exists. I think, yeah, it's not really something I've encountered. Maybe in Sealed, it's something that's going to come up once in a while. But this is a value card. This is a long game card. It's not really something you want in your aggro white artifact shells. And if you are enjoying the show and you want to give back in some way, go check out the Patreon. Patreon.com/limitedlevelups. There are a bunch of rewards over there that we want to give back to you if you choose to support us. So yeah, go check that page out and see if there's anything that interests you over there, or if you just want to support the channel, give back if you feel like you've learned enough from the channel. Or if you want to support in a non-monetary way, a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube video goes a very long way. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, next archetype space we're going to talk about is the blue-red theme of 4 mana spent on a non-creature spell. So this is majority of the time going to be a blue-red exclusive thing, right? I'd say about 80% of the time, you don't really care about this theme unless you're exactly blue-red, because the gold cards, like the payoffs, right? 2 out of the 5 payoffs here are Shantoto and the Emperor of Palamecia. So, you know, you're not generally going to splash these cards, I don't find. But I do think that in every color pair, every blue color pair, sorry, so that's like blue-black, blue-white, blue-green, there's the potential to care about this theme, and I have cared about this theme in each of those color pairs. Blue-green, probably the one that's the least common, but blue-black and blue-white, not that uncommon. Especially because Sahagin and Ultros, which is the 2/1 octopus that taps things down, like, these are just pretty good cards, like strong cards that you want to enable, cards that you take pretty highly. There's also Blazing Bomb, which is the single red mana 1/1 that gets a counter whenever you trigger it. I'll play this one once in a while in like my red-white decks, but it doesn't make a non-red-blue deck anywhere close to as often as Sahagin and Ultros, though. Let's just talk about numbers in the blue-red deck. So I think for all of these payoffs, I'm looking for like 5 at a minimum, 5 ways to trigger them. Ideally, there are things that are cheap on one end and expensive on the other. So stuff like Ice Magic, stuff like Thunder Magic, Dreams of Laguna, because you can very easily run into the problem where you're like, oh, I picked up a trigger for my Shantoto. I picked up another trigger for my Shantoto. I picked up another trigger, and you've got like 7 4-drops, right? You do want to try to avoid that. So when I'm drafting blue-red, Ice Magic, Thunder Magic, Dreams of Laguna, good cards in general, of course, but very, very high priority. I take these over everything but the best cards in the set when I'm drafting a good blue-red deck. But yeah, in general, when you're drafting blue-red, you don't have too much of a problem getting to that count of 5, I find. And also, one of the things that's kind of nice is you can kind of cheat a little bit on the numbers. Like, yeah, you know, I don't think your deck's going to be awesome. Your Ultros isn't going to be awesome if you have like 4 triggers. But I can still make it more than, you know, enabling some other synergy, let's say. Because in blue-red, you tend to have a lot of ways to see extra cards, or a lot of the blue card draw. Even something like Combat Tutorial, right? The draw 2, 3 mana draw 2, put a counter on something. Sure, that doesn't actually trigger your payoffs, but it does help your cause, right? It helps you find those cards a little more often. And I'm basically happy to play any of the cards that will trigger my payoffs here. Like, there's some that are better than others, of course, but I don't mind playing a Warrior Sword in blue-red if I'm a little bit light on triggers. I don't mind Retrieve the Esper, right? That was actually kind of nice. So I was kind of poo-pooing Retrieve the Esper in blue-white, but in blue-red, where it actually gives you 2 triggers, right? Once when you cast it and once when you flash it back, I'm actually pretty into it in blue-red. Also want to call it Syncopate, kind of the sneaky one that people forget about sometimes, because Syncopate, the X and a blue counter spell, this does trigger your payoffs. Like, you can pay 4 or 5 mana. You can also overpay, right? So yeah, definitely one that should count in there. In black, you've got some, you know, usual suspects, just good cards that happen to trigger your payoffs. So yeah, when I'm in blue-black, again, Sahuagin and Ultros are still pretty high picks. And this is another good example of themes transcending colors, right? You might be like, oh, I'm blue-black. I don't know how much I want Sahuagin. You might be earlier in the draft or early-ish in the draft. You've got a bunch of blue and black cards, and you see a Sahuagin 7th, 8th pick. You're like, well, I don't know. That's not really for my deck. No, like, it's pretty easy to enable even in a non-blue-red color pair. So yeah, side quest, Hunt the Mark, Sephiroth's Intervention, Resentful Revelation, you flash it back, Circle of Power, all these cards are good, right? These all fit in, and it's not like you're giving up anything for synergy. These are just generically good cards. White actually has a surprising number of cards that trigger these things. So I mentioned before when we were talking about blue-white, Magitech Infantry, and White Auracite, those are triggers. But also, Fate of the Suncrist. The removal spell destroys a non-land permanent and costs 2 less if you target a tapped creature. It triggers if you really need it. Like, one thing about this card I want to say is I don't like it very much. I get the vibe that it's a little bit overrated, just how, I hear people talk about it and where I see people take it. People aren't like first picking, second picking this card or anything. But, when they're in white, they go, oh yeah, it's a white removal spell. I think you want to be pickier about this one. I think it's, both ends are very clunky. We've had some versions of the effect in the last few sets that have been good, right? Like Bride's End, and there's the one from Duskmorn. But the difference between that and this one is pretty massive because the tapped creature mode, that was 2 on those cards. This is 3. Very different card. So yeah, just like side note on Fate of the Suncrist, I don't think this is a card you really actively want in very many decks. I'm going to play it if I really need removal. I'm going to play it, for example, if I really want to trigger my Ultros and my Sahuagins, if I have like 3 Sahuagins, I'm like, oh man, I moved into blue-white and I don't have that many triggers. Sure, I'll play it there. Notably, you don't actually get the trigger on your Sahuagin if you get the discount, right? Because it actually cares about how much mana you spend. So, yeah, just a side note there on Fate of the Suncrist. Also, some other ones. Restoration Magic, the single white mana instant that gives something hexproof indestructible, or you can kick it for an extra mana to gain 3 life. Or for 5 full mana, so this is where the trigger comes in, permanents you control, all permanents, gain Hexproof Indestructible until end of turn, and you gain 6 life. Another card I want to have a quick sidebar on. I like this card quite a bit, mostly when I've got flyers, so, you're talking, blue, whites, the artifact aggro deck is definitely a place that I'm fond of playing it, because the idea there is if all your things are flying, or most of your things are flying, then the only way your opponent can interact with them generally is through removal spells. And if you can predictably end up in that game state where you're going to be like, okay, well, I've got some flyers, and my opponent has to point removal spells at them or they're just going to die, you can really engineer that situation. That's that giant blowout where they spend 4 mana on the removal spell, you Restoration Magic, and, you really get them. The Crystal's Chosen is another trigger here. This is the 7 mana, make 4 1/1s that put a +1/+1 counter on each of the creatures you control. And then we move up to some rares, too. Actually, a few rares that trigger it. So we've got Machinist's Arsenal. This is the 5 mana job select equipment. The equipped creature gets +2/+2 for each artifact you control. We've got Moogle's Valor. Great card, by the way. Another one that I get passed once in a while in pack 1, and I go, oh, maybe people are underrating this card. This is the 5 mana instant that makes a 1/2 lifelink for each creature you control, and all your creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. Moving on to green, like I mentioned, not as much here, but we've got like Esper Origins, we've got Giselle Green, so these are both, cards you can flash back from your graveyard, and you pay 4 mana for a non-creature. Also, Chocobo Racetrack, and I like Chocobo Racetrack in some blue-green decks, especially blue-green, actually, where you're drawing a bunch of cards, hitting land drops consistently, have cards like Ignis, the blue-green gold card, and Town Greeter that are spells that gets lands into play. And then, of course, I want to shout out the vehicles, because vehicles trigger these payoffs too, these non-creature payoffs, which, there's something in my brain that goes like, it like slightly pauses, like, wait, does that work? Is that a thing? And no, it is, right? You kind of think of vehicles as creatures, but they are not creatures until they hit the battlefield. So yeah, your Regalia, your Lunar Whale, those are also payoffs for your blue non-creature things. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the graveyard stuff. And I think for the most part, like, for the green and black cards, what you see is what you get. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time, like, reading out all the green mill and mill payoffs, because I think those are kind of known quantities, and they just work, right? That's actually one nice thing to say about this set, is that the synergies, for the most part, they just work. Like, if you see a card and it's like, oh, I could do this thing, the cards are there. It's a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, that definitely applies for green-black too. So I'm not going to go over all the actual green-black cards. For this section, though, I do want to highlight what I was talking about earlier when you're considering adding blue and red cards to your deck. And I do quite often consider adding blue and red cards to my green-black decks, because there are a lot of cards that not only are payoffs for having cards in the graveyard in red and blue, but also enablers. There's a lot of cards that help you fill up your grave. Town Greeter, which is the 2-mana 1/1 mill 4, take a land from those, and Shinra Reinforcements, which is the 3-mana 2/3 mill 3 game 3. These enablers are extremely important to this deck, because the whole idea with this green-black graveyard deck, like a really great over-the-top version, is you're just very happy to put a bunch of cards in your graveyard because they do something there, or they add to your count for cards like Cloud of Darkness, the signpost in common that comes in, kills something, gives it -X based on the number of permanents in your grave. And, this is the kind of deck where if you had this option, if you had the option to say, at the beginning of the game, would you like to mill 10 cards? Absolutely. I would do that every single time playing green-black. That's a very good thing to do. So when your Town Greeters and your Shinra Reinforcement, which, by the way, just to give you some counts, I really want maybe like 5 of these between the two of them to really just make sure you have one in your opening hand pretty consistently, or at least, in the top 15-ish cards. When you've got that number, your deck's going to tick. When you don't have that number, you're going to have a little bit of trouble, right? You're going to be a little bit awkward. Your cards just aren't going to really function the way you want them to. So it's very nice to be able to reach out into another color when you're not seeing the cards you need. You're not seeing the greeters. You're not seeing the reinforcements. Pick up a blue card like SideQuest Card Collection, which is the blue 4-mana enchantment. Draw 3 cards, put 2 in the graveyard. Or in red, you might pick up Laughing Mad, which is the discard a card to draw 2 cards and has flashback for 4 mana. Doesn't quite fill your grave at the rate that you want for Town Greeter or Shinra Reinforcements, but if you can pick up the mana fixing to be able to play these cards, it's much better than not having enablers and just not having your deck function at all. And along those lines, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I do, when I'm drafting green-black graveyard stuff, really put a priority on picking up basically the non-white dual lands. So the blue-black lands, the red-black lands, even, the green-red lands, because I am anticipating either wanting to pick up payoffs for this deck or needing more enablers that I'm not seeing at the table, and being able to add those enablers to make my deck function. Well, that's going to be a good thing. And ideally in this deck, like every single card in your deck serves a purpose. It either puts cards in the graveyard, or is something good in the graveyard, or is just, a removal spell. That may not fit into either of those categories. So for example, a card like Gisel Greens, the 1 in a green sorcerer, you make a bird token, flashback for 7 mana. Like, this kind of card, pretty medium in most decks, but I'm happy to fill my deck out with this card. And if you want a little bit more in-depth explanation and just like talking about the green-black card specifically, I did do a little bit more of a deep dive last week, so go check out that episode. But for this one, I want to talk about the blue and red cards. So blue cards you're looking for. I already called up the side quest. I think that card's pretty strong. Some rares here, and this is one of the obvious reasons you're going to want to add blue to these decks, is Sin. This is the 7-mana Sultai rare, 7/7 flyer, that when it attacks or enters, you exile a permanent card from your graveyard, create a tapped token that's a copy of it, and if you exile a land this way, repeat the process. Something that's a little small quirk about this card is you don't want to use the world map, to splash this card, the 1-mana artifact, because the problem is that a lot of the time you're going to hit the world map when you cast in. And that's awkward, because when you cast this card, you really want to feel advantage when you cast your 7-mana spell, even if your opponent has a removal spell to clean it up right away. So just a little bit of a quirk there. But another one, this one's a mythic. This is Emmett Selch, Unsundered. So this is 1 blue-black for a 2/4 vigilance. When it enters or attacks, you loot, you draw a card, discard a card. And then if you have 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you transform it. And that's really hard, right? Like 14 is a huge number, but this deck, this black-green deck, has the tools. You can definitely do it. Not something you encounter very often when you're drafting blue-black, but in green-black it's possible. And the backside is a phenomenal payoff. It's a 6/6 vigilance that says during your turn you can cast spells out of your graveyard. So you just you mill your entire deck, and then you cast this, it flips, and you get to just draw your entire graveyard again. I'm happy to play the flashback cards, Dreams of Laguna, and retrieve the Esper. Also, Quistis Trep, the 3-mana 2/2 in blue that flashes back a card from your graveyard, or any graveyard, but you often have selection in your graveyard. A card I've splashed once in a while. Swallowed by Leviathan. This is another one that's kind of nice. This is the counter spell that you counter target spell unless they pay 1 for each card in your graveyard, and you surveil 2. And yeah, this is just a good interaction spell. It's good early, good late, even on the splash. It's a card I'm happy to have later, and it's synergistic, right? It fills your graveyard. So I think the blue stuff is kind of intuitive, and that is something that, I think a lot of people have stumbled upon. I heard even in the first week of the format, Sultai value was kind of a shard of the format that people were drafting. But something I've been getting into more and more is adding red to the deck. And I think this is something that not as many people are doing. And I think there are some really compelling reasons to do so. So the most compelling reason is Nibelheim of Flame. This is the 2-red sorcery at Mythic that you choose something you control, choose a creature, it deals damage to each other creature, and it has flashback for 7 mana. So a bit of a tough ask because it's red. And a side note on that, actually, I'm talking about these, adding red and blue mana to your deck. I'm not talking about adding, 7 blue cards or anything, or 7 red cards. I'm talking about like adding 1 or 2, adding a really good payoff or a really good enabler if you're missing enablers. You still have to respect your mana base, of course. And this one in particular is red, so to play this card, you need to have, 6, 7 red sources at a minimum. But if you can get there, the advantage of being able to mill this card instead of just drawing it sometimes, that's really big. So this is a really good reason to add red to your deck if you can pick up that fixing. I think the second big reason is Sorceress's Schemes. So this is the 4 mana sorcery, return a instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. You add red mana, has flashback for 5 mana. And I think on the first, the State of the Format episode of this format, I kind of said, it's just a blue-red card exclusively. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like this card is just a good red card in pretty much every red deck. I mean, I guess not like red-white, right? But as long as you've got enough spells, and especially if you're milling, really strong card. And you can like loop 2 copies of it if you have 2 of them. Not that that comes up very often, but it's a thing you could do. And yeah, it's the same kind of idea where if you just get to mill this some amount of the time, free value, like that's what your deck is really looking for. A few more ones. One that I don't add that often is Call the Mountain Chocobo. This is the one that make a 2/2 and go search for a mountain. Obviously, this is a little bit awkward because you don't want to add that many mountains to your deck, but maybe if you are splashing Nibelheim of Flame, you have a bit of a weird build in there where you've got like 3 mountains, a bunch of green fixing, so you're not getting mana screwed on your black and green cards. So I can see something happening there, but not one that happens all that often. It does have flashback, though. And we've got some gold cards that do good things in the graveyard. So Garland, Knight of Cornelia, is the 2 mana 3/2 black-red. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Surveil 1, so that's an enabler, right? And then the payoff, it's a payoff and an enabler. Payoff is 7 mana, 3 black, red. Return it from the graveyard to the battlefield as a 5/5 flyer. Just like Nibelheim of Flame, you do want to make sure you have enough red sources where eventually you'll get this back from the graveyard. And then there's also Rydia, Summoner of the Mist. So this is kind of a niche card that doesn't really see that much play. A little bit without a home. This is the 2 mana 1/2 landfall. You can discard a card and draw a card, and you can pay X and tap her to reanimate a Saga. Yeah, so once again, a pretty good enabler if you can cast her. Like, fills the grave pretty consistently. If you've got Sagas, ideally you do. You get to fill the grave with those, and Rydia can buy them back. So another card that I'm pretty happy to play in this space. And then this, I think, is the one home where I'm happy to play Summon Gia for free. It's the 3 mana 3/2 with the, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. And the last 2 chapters are make red mana. I don't think this is a card you want to splash in like a green-black deck. It's just not really powerful enough. But I think you can apply a lot of the same concepts that I've been talking about to a red-green deck, right? Where you miss out on the black mill, you miss out on Shinra reinforcements, but you get all the red cards, right, that are good in the graveyard. You get to keep Town Greeter. Maybe Rydia is more of an enabler in your deck than it would be in some other decks. And if that's the case, then you've got a lot of flashback cards, and you're actually going up a card on this card when you discard a card, draw a card. I can see it being pretty good there. And then we've got colorless cards, right? We've got Relentless X ATM 092. That's the 6 mana 6/5. It can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, and you can pay 8 mana to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So kind of the same thing as a lot of the cards we talked about. And also Eden's Seat of the Sanctum. This is the town that you can pay 5 mana, mill 2, and then return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So one thing with these decks is that if you're just like mill, and you sometimes just mill all your impactful cards, right? So I do like to build my deck with some resiliency, some redundancy, so I don't just get unlucky and go, oops, I milled all my payoffs. And, maybe my payoffs weren't things I could cast in my grave. There are things that needed creatures in the grave, but are just cards you want to cast from your hand. How do I fix that problem? Well, number one, I do like a copy of Fight On in these decks, of course. That's the 3-mana black card that returns 2 creatures from your grave to your hand. And the more self-mill I have, the more likely I am to play 2 copies of that card. I think 1 is the standard, but if you've got, 5 or 6 enablers, ways to put cards in the graveyard, I think you can definitely lean towards 2 to have just that much more value. And then Eden is kind of a stand-in for that card too. So yeah, overall, I've been finding myself in this space a lot lately because, as you've seen, there's a lot of cards that go into this space, and it's a pretty common synergy you can assemble because there's a lot of cards in the set that enable it or pay you off for putting things in the graveyard. And one of the themes for this set for my content has been, don't be afraid of mill. Don't be afraid of mill. Really embrace the mill and lean into it. So, just more reason to, because I think if you look at this graveyard space as, hey, I can add multiple colors to my deck and get even more synergy in there, you can really get a stew brewing there. The next archetype I've been loving. This is one that I've just been getting into a lot. It's my favorite deck to play in the format, and it's Grixis Control, which is a little bit different from like the blue-red spell space, because I think the natural inclination of the blue-red spell space is just like kill you basically as fast as you can, where in the Grixis Control decks, it's a little more just as much card draw and removal as you can pick up, and you'll win eventually, right? Very in control deck fashion, typical control deck fashion. And so, this is the age-old synergy of just card draw plus removal spells. When you have a lot of removal spells, you want card draw, so you cast other things, answer your opponent's stuff, you draw cards, you gas back up, and when you've got a lot of card draw, well, you want a way to convert that card draw into board-affecting presence quickly, ways that you can stave off aggression, and so removal's pretty good. And so often I get into this deck just by doing that, because the card draw and the removal spells in this format are generally pretty good. They're good early picks. I'll end up with a pile of Dreams Lagunas and combat tutorials and Thunder Magics and stuff like that. And then I go, okay, well, now what, right? Because, any good control deck needs some way to finish the game. It does need to be able to say, okay, eventually I'm going to turn all this card draw and removal into a way where I can actually close out the game. So the ways that I've been doing it are kind of 3. 1, you would have a bomb. And that's the obvious one. So Kefka, Court Mage, this is the Grixis rare that draws a bunch of cards and turns into a big flyer. Very good card. You could also just have an Arden or, just some very good, impactful, expensive card. That totally gets the job done. But one of the nice things about this deck is it's a control deck that I think is enabled at the common and uncommon level where you don't need the rares. The rares are always nice. I'm not going to turn them down. But I think you can fall back on something like Sahagin, right? If you just get this through a few times. It's your early blocker, and then, you push this through, you remove all your opponent's stuff, cast card draw spells. Maybe you protect the Sahagin with some counter magic. That gets the job done. But I think the other way to do it is just relying on the wizard tokens. And this has been pretty consistent, right? A pretty consistent way to close out the game. So we're talking about Corner by Black Mages. We're talking about Circle of Power, the 4-mana, draw 2 and lose 2 life, and then you make a wizard, and your wizards get lifelink. But also Black Mage's Rod. I found Black Mage's Rod to be actually pretty good 2-drop in these decks. I don't mind trading off my 2-mana 2-1. That's totally fine, with their 2-drop. And it just kind of sits around. You can spend extra mana equipping. Maybe you equip it to another wizard that, that wizard will now double ping. Or you put it on a Sahagin and that gives you another additional point or two. Like the equipment side of things, giving +1/+0 actually mattering. And you just chip damage your opponent out. And often the way these decks pan out for me, it's not like pure control where you're like, I'm just going to sit there and kill all your stuff and draw a bunch of cards and, not affect the board at all. Usually you've got a Dragoon's Wyvern, and you've got maybe a Pixie. You've got the card collection, the side quest that flips into a 4/4 flyer. You've got ways to do some chip damage. You're not relying on your wizards to do literally the full 20. But what the wizards are really nice at doing is just saying, okay, once I've gotten you to 11, I don't need to attack you anymore. I can just say, I can block all day. I can be defensive here, right? That's always one of the tensions when playing a control deck. You're like, I want to turn the corner, but if I do it too early and I start attacking, my opponent could cast a removal spell in a turn and then attack me, cast a combat trick for lethal. So being able to just say, hey, I'm just going to block. I'm just going to block. I don't need to turn my creature sideways. That's a real advantage. So talking about some numbers here of things you want, card draw and removal spells. Well, I find that any of my control decks, any of my slower decks, they want 4 card draw spells, maybe even 5 sometimes. Between Dreams of Laguna, Combat Tutorial, the Revelation, look at the top 3, take 1 with flashback, that definitely counts. You also have, some high rarity stuff like the card collection. You've also got Circle of Power. So yeah, something in that neighborhood, 4 or 5. And for removal spells to really feel like I have enough removal where I will consistently be able to stave off early aggression or deal with, some big thing that my opponent has. I say somewhere in the like 6-7 range. You don't have to have infinite removal, but you do want to make sure you have more than like 3 or 4, right? 6, 7, 8, something like that. So the composition of this deck is usually like you've got 6, 7, 8 removal spells, 4 or 5 card draw spells, and then the rest of the spells are, the best creatures, the wyverns, and just the quality creatures you pick up, and then the cards that make the mages, and of course, good rares in there. So yeah, this has been one of my favorite decks. I actually had quite a few recent drafts on the YouTube if you want to go check out this deck in action, and it's been a lot of fun. So anybody who is in the market for a good control deck, yeah, this is something I think you definitely do in this format. All right, our next archetype space to talk about is the sacrifice space, and this is mostly a black and white thing, but sometimes gets a little bit spicy and you can add some red cards to the deck. This is an archetype that I hadn't really drafted for the first week or two of the format, have been getting into it more and more because it uses a lot of cards that, you get pretty late and you kind of a deck that you can use a lot of the scraps that people don't really want to pretty good effect. So the main idea for this deck, kind of like you want every card in the green-black graveyard deck to either mill you or be good in the graveyard, you want every card in this deck to make 2 pieces of cardboard or be a way to sacrifice those pieces of cardboard. So in white, we of course get the job select equipment, and these count because all of these sacrifice cards, they can sacrifice a creature or an equipment. And so, these are just generally high picks. You're going to take them if you're in white, and then you can transition into this black deck if black is open. We also have Dwarven Castle Guard as a card that you get to play as a good card in this deck that really isn't a desirable card anywhere else. This is the 2-mana 2/1. Then when it dies, you make a hero token. For the black cards, we've got Black Mage's Rod, which, job select equipment, makes 2 permanents. Heck Dies, the 2-mana 1/1 that makes each opponent discard a card. And Undercity Dire Rat, the 2/2 that when it dies, makes a treasure token. Cornered by Black Mage is really, really good here. Not exactly making 2 pieces of cardboard for you, but putting your opponent down a piece of cardboard, and you get a piece of cardboard. Namazu Trader is the 4-mana 3/4 in black that when it enters, you lose a life and you create a treasure token. And whenever this creature attacks, you can sacrifice another creature or artifact. If you do Surveil 2, this is definitely one that, you get pretty close to last pick. Nobody else really wants this card, and, this deck can make pretty good use out of it. Rufus Shinra, one of the black, white, gold cards, 3-mana 2/4. Then when it attacks, you make a 2/2 legendary creature named Darkstar, as long as you don't already control Darkstar, so another thing that can just pump out a bunch of cardboard. So those are the enablers, right? Just basically anything that makes 2 rectangles. And then for the payoffs, we've got, again, a lot of cards that not a lot of decks want, but are very effective here. So we've got Judge Magister Gabranth. This is the 2-mana 2/2 menace. Then whenever another creature or artifact you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on Judge. We've got Albed Salvagers, which is the Blood Artist type of card, the 3-mana 2/3. Whenever an artifact or a creature you control dies, your opponent loses a life, you gain a life. Gaius Van Baelster, which is the 4-mana 3/2. When it enters, you can either make each player sacrifice a token creature, a non-token creature, or an enchantment. We have a bonus sheet card, Deadly Dispute, the 2-mana instant that says sacrifice a creature or an artifact, draw 2 cards, and then make a treasure token. We've got Reno Unrude, which is the 2-mana 1/2 menace that when it deals combat damage to a player, you can sacrifice a artifact or creature, and you can cast that card if you'd like. This card, it kind of has not found much of a place in the format, but it is good here, right? It's not a good card in like a green-black deck or like a blue-black control deck or anything. This is the deck for it, and it's another card that you get fairly late because nobody really wants it. And then for our final payoff here, we've got a card I have really, really taken a liking to, Phantom Train. This is the 4-mana 4/4 vehicle, no crew costs, has trample by the way, and to wake it up, you have to sacrifice a artifact or a creature, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And this is a card that I saw Mike Sigrist talking about on Twitter earlier this week. He was saying, like, this card is really good. People are underrating it. The 17 lands data does not tell the full story. And I fully agree with that. In a deck where you've gone, a Dwarven Castle Guard on 2, into a 3-mana permanent that makes 2 pieces of cardboard, into Phantom Train, that Phantom Train is what the game becomes about. Your opponent goes, uh-oh, that is a massive problem. And of course, you have to be a little bit careful because one removal spell can kind of 2-for-1 you or 1.5-for-1 you. You give up a little bit of value, activate your train, you get in, they just cast a Sephiroth intervention. You want to be careful about it. You want to time your attacks with this on times when your opponent is tapped out. But in this deck, another thing too, is you can get lethal out of nowhere a lot of the time because you can just go, okay, pile on all my creatures, sack all my stuff. This is not a once per turn thing. Maybe you even got an Albed Salvagers on the battlefield, right? And so with that combo, train plus Salvagers and a bunch of fodder lying around, you get to just sack your entire board, drain your opponent for 6 or something, put 6 counters on the train, and yeah, that ends the game a lot of the time. And, like I just mentioned, it's a little bit risky to kind of go all in, but when I have Phantom Train in my deck, I do really like a copy of Restoration Magic. That's the white uncommon protection spell. Really makes you feel safe about just going like, yep, I'm just going to kill you, Maybe one turn you say, okay, you're tapped out, so this turn I wake it up, I attack you for, 6 or 7. The next turn, the opponent leaves up mana because they go, okay, I got to deal with that train. You get to then sack your board and protect it with Restoration Magic. So yeah, I think an excellent payoff for this deck. And once again, a card that nobody respects very much, nobody really wants. Rightly so. It's only for this deck. But I think very, very good in this deck, and I really just want to hammer that home. I think this is probably the best payoff for what you're doing here, where you're just like, I've got all the cardboard in the world. What do I do with it? You send it to the train. And then, yeah, so I was talking about getting spicy with red cards. So there is a little bit of a steal and sack thing you can do in this set, where you steal your opponent's creatures and you sacrifice them to your sacrifice outlets. And the nice thing here is that there are 2 free sacrifice outlets. There's the Phantom Train, that's the free one, and the Namazu Trader, that's the 3/4 that when it attacks, you can sacrifice something. So the cards that you're looking for this strategy: Unexpected Request, which is the 3 mana sorcery, gain control of target creature until end turn, untap it, gains haste, your typical active treason. You can also attach an equipment to that creature if you'd like. Another card you get pretty much last pick every single time, and Zidane. This is the red, white, gold card, 3/3 that comes in, steals something. So you've got a good amount of consistency here between sacrifice outlets and 2 ways to steal your opponent's creatures. The nice thing, too, is that a lot of the black cards between Undercity Dire and the Trader and Deadly Dispute, those make treasure. Obviously, you want to be able to pick up some dual lands to be able to play these. You don't want to just rely on treasure, but the treasure does help you grease the wheels a little bit. It makes your mana base a little bit better. So yeah, absolutely a thing you can do. And I would really recommend, if this is not a space you've explored, think about it a little bit more. I don't think you should just jump in and be like, I'm going to draft sacrifice today. But if the black and white cards are flowing to some degree, or you've first picked some good black cards and the other black cards, the more desirable black cards are going early, you're often going to see the Traders and the Hekdais and the Undercity Dire Rats, right? You're going to see those cards pretty often, and they make a really good core, a shell for this deck. All right, our last archetype we're going to talk about is BANT Birds, and this one doesn't come together all that often, but I've had a few opportunities lately to get into it. And it's pretty cool when it happens. And just like a lot of the decks we talked about today, it does use some underutilized cards in the format. It's something that you can say, oh, my table isn't taking the bird cards, and you can actually get pretty rewarded. So what are the reasons you want to be BANT Birds? Well, you've got the Busty Green rare, Saz Katsroy, and it's just a great green card. You don't necessarily have to go into birds, but why not? Why not go into birds? This is the 4 mana 3/3. Search your library for a basic or a bird when it enters, and then when it attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then double the number of counters. We've also got Traveling Chocobo as a mythic, which once again is just a good card, but very good in the bird decks. This is the 3 mana 3/2 that you can look at the top card of your library. You can play lands and birds from the top card. And if a bird or land would enter under your control and it triggers an ability, that ability triggers again. So these are cards that you take early and you're just going to take them. You just want to play these. They're not necessarily pushing you down the bird path. But we've also got some reward rares, like rares that people aren't generally going to first pick. You get them pretty late. Bart's and Boko, the Flame Tongue Bird, the 3 green 4/3 that has affinity for birds, and when it enters, each other bird you control deals damage to target creature and opponent controls. We've also got Choco, Paradise Seeker, the 4 mana BANT Bird, 4 mana 3/5 rare, that when one or more birds you control attacks, look at that many cards from the top of your library, you can put one into your hand and then all of the lands onto the battlefield. And then Choco has the bird landfall ability, it gets +1/+0. So yeah, you get these cards fairly late. You also get a very strong bird payoff that people don't really take. You get this pretty late. Side quest, Raise a Choco. This is the 2 mana 2/2 enchantment. When it enters, you make a bird token. And then when you control 4 birds on your main phase, first main phase, you flip into the backside, which is a 2/2 bird, that when it flips, you get a basic land from your library, put it on the battlefield tap, and the landfall ability is all birds you control get +1/+0. So a very, very good payoff. So the power's there, right? Like we've got these cards that it's worth actually building around. Now, what are you filling out your deck with? Well, luckily, we've got some very good birds as well. Saz Chocobo, the green 01 that has landfall, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It also has Summon Fat Chocobo, which is the 5 mana 4/4 that comes in and makes a 2/2 bird token. Worth noting that, with the side quest, Raise a Chocobo, I think it is very important to have Summon Fat Chocobos, because getting to 4 birds is tricky, right? Without them dying or anything like that. By the way, I didn't, linger on the side quest Raise a Chocobo. That backside, when it flips, is busted good. Like, getting that landfall trigger guaranteed and all your birds get pumped, like, really, really strong. We've also got, of course, just a few other ones. Ambrosia Whiteheart, that's the legendary white one that picks up a permanent. So pretty nice with side quest Raise a Chocobo, because it kind of counts like multiple birds, right? Because you can pick up side quest and make another token. So this one also helps you get multiple birds in the battlefield. We've got Giselle Greens, the green token maker. Summon Chocomog, that is, of course, a Chocobo. The Regalia is very good in this deck, the rare 4/4 vehicle that when it attacks, you get a land from your deck, put it on the battlefield. So getting into this deck, unless you're just one to be like, oh, I got opened up a bird rare, let's jump in. Often what happens is I get into it because I maybe first pick Saz and then get past one of the payoff rares. That can certainly happen. Or I'm moving into green-white, and instead of like the go-wide payoffs, I'm seeing these bird payoffs, right? These rare bird payoffs. I'll move in then. And I think one thing to consider is that you do have more of an aggro version of this deck and a more mid-rangey version of this deck. The aggro version of this deck is more green-white base, just typical. You're not going to want to splash very often in your aggro decks. But for the more mid-rangey decks, where you've got like Choco, you're splashing Choco, the BANT card, and you have some card draw in your deck too, right? Like Combat Tutorials, Dreams Laguna, because with a lot of these cards, you really do want to keep making land drops, and so just card draws to be able to make sure you make land drops is really nice. There's also Precious Wanderings, the 3-mana ramp spell that gets a land and puts a counter on something. Like, that's a pretty good card in these decks. If you are the more mid-rangey deck rather than the aggro version, Chocobo Racetrack becomes a viable option for you. The 5-mana green artifact that landfall, you make a 2/2 bird. That's a pretty nice way to be able to turn on your side quests. So yeah, I really think that the edge you gain drafting this deck is getting side quest Raise a Chocobo, this exceptionally good uncommon, pretty much for free in a lot of pods. Also, those rares I talked about that you kind of get for free sometimes. You do need a lot of birds. Like, number-wise, I'm looking at, something like 8, 9, 10 birds, I would say. And ideally, some of those are the birds that make multiple tokens. But it's doable. Just kind of want to put it out there. Anyways, I'm going to pack it up from here. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you made it this far on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Check out the Patreon as well if you're interested in that. And yeah, I hope this was fun. Hope this was helpful. Hope this got you a little more prepared for your next draft. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.